Like a female dog, if my daughter comes out in any way, shape, or form, retarded or deformed, like that bitch dog, I will take her out of this world. That's what my mom told all the nurses and doctors the day that I was born. My life was twisted before it began. My mom and dad were first cousins. A lot of drugs. Lots. A lot of sex. A lot of parties that included acid and anything and everything you could think of. And so I was born, which scared a lot of the family. My mother was told that I would come out of mongoloid, whatever. And so, therefore, she was scared and she voiced it to the doctors and the nurses. And so, the moment after I was born, they took me out of the room and in piled the social workers. So, my parentage was never a secret. Now, it got buried and it got shut into a closet for a long time until there was no ability to deny it because of DNA tests. DNA's great. But that was the day that I lost my life, was the day I was born. I think simply because of the bloodlines and the way that I was born out of incest made me a target. And so from there on out, there was social workers involved. Now, in all the time from age of being born till age 5, none of them social workers did anything. They did not help me. They would come around a lot. One social worker had a crush on my mother, and he would show up ungodly hours of the night, offer her drugs, cocaine. Cocaine was really big. And at the time she was on probation or something, she couldn't even drink. And he would show up. I'll get back to him later. So it wasn't until age 5 that the abuse came out in the open because of a beautiful teacher. My kindergarten teacher, as a matter of fact, gave all the kids in class a lump of clay, and we could make anything we wanted. I kind of remember, vaguely, not, I just remember how excited she was. You can make anything you want. And by the end of it, she asked me what I had made, and I told her it's a bear. Instead, what I made was an anatomically correct version of a phallus. And so my teacher is trying to look at this clay object and, well, doesn't a bear have ears? Not this bear. Doesn't a bear have a head? Not this bear. This is my bear. I don't know if it was maybe a game that was played with me during grooming, but it was a bear. And so then social workers and school counselors and principals and teachers and psychologists, psychiatrists were now at the school with my mother. And she asked me if I knew the difference between boys and girls. I said, well, yeah. I said, because the man showed me the dead girl. She didn't believe me. She's like, dead girl, what are you talking about? I'd always had an imagination. I could tell some Wendy some stories, but they were fantasies, like how squirrels could fly and, things like of that nature. I didn't really talk about dead girls, but there was a general theme that she didn't understand, and that was the army men. I was always talking about the army men. Eventually, my mom decided to humor me. And she said, why don't you take me where this body is that you keep talking about? So I took her down. Body was gone. Makes me look crazy. And my mom was mad. She was angry. I remember her being so mad at me, like, why are you coming up with this? You're going to get me in trouble. What are you making in school? And how do you even know what it looks like? And so I was like, well, no, maybe they just brought her back, and she's like, what are you talking about? Maybe they brought her back to the army base, the secret army base. And she's like, Misty, just knock it off, and I was like, but then she noticed, and I know she noticed the little trail. And so we followed this little trail and we made it to a fence that had it was like a chain link fence, and it had the what is it? The material, the camouflage. It had like this camouflage tarp running all along the fence. And I remember looking at my mom, and I thought I was going to be in trouble, and her eyes bulging out of her head. It was the first time she believed what I was telling her. And I think that's what spiraled her down into alcoholism and drug addiction like never before. But that was at age 5. And I hadn't even told her about the other things I'd experienced. And she knew something was going on. I know she knows, no matter how much deniability she has to this day, I know she knows what was going on. There was something. I was always a different child. I was always in the adults' conversations. I didn't play with kids my age. I couldn't relate to them. And I had a tendency to be really inappropriate. Like, you couldn't take me anywhere. I was an odd child, and I'm still an odd adult, but I own it now. But back then, it was just, I was a strange child, and a lot of kids weren't allowed to play with me. Not that I had many friends to begin with. We were always moving. I couldn't make friends long enough to have, a good solid foundation. Eventually, my mom gave me over to my father's parents. And when you're looking at child abuse, you need to understand it doesn't just start with out of the blue. Now, in some instances, possibly of mental health, but I think child abuse is a learned behavior. Now, where my mom learned it from, I don't know. My mom was never spanked. My mom was barely grounded, but the physical abuse on me was rough. And so anyway, when I was about 6 years old, I went to go live with other family, and then I went back to my mother. And it didn't last long. She wound up abandoning me behind a junkyard for weeks. I would say it had to have been anywhere from a month to 6 weeks. I was pretty young. I just know how it was a long time. It was a really long time. And they were looking for work, whatever. I don't know if she forgot I existed or what. So I lived in a van behind a junkyard with a dog. And after that, because I made my way to a farmhouse, and I think they were about to call police or something, my mom had pulled up. Perfect timing. She pulled up, she got me out of there, took me back to Iowa, and then basically threw me away. She didn't want nothing to do with me anymore, because I was ruining her life. So, after that, I was basically a ward of the state because they wouldn't adopt me. And there was a lot of questions about who my father was. So DNA tests proved who my father was. And he'd always been in prison or whatever from as long as I can remember. So I didn't really know him. But eventually, I wound up having behaviors. I started acting out a lot, running away, talking back, things like that. I wasn't really a terrible kid, but I wasn't doing right. I ain't gonna lie about that. I was terrible in school. I still didn't really make friends very easy. But by the time I hit my teenage years, I started recognizing certain patterns and stuff like that, and things that I knew were wrong. Like, even though I grew up with them, and there's supposed to be that sense of normalcy, because that abuse was my normal. That's if I got the shit kicked out of me, that was normal. I did something wrong, or I breathed too loud. Something. I did something wrong. I deserved it. That's how I felt being abused until I got about, up there in the tween years, and then I didn't like being abused anymore. So I became very aggressive, and I started fighting, and I was doing really terrible things. Like, I stabbed a teacher with a pair of scissors. I stabbed another kid with a pencil. I had so much anger inside me. And throughout all the psychologists and psychiatrists and all the therapy sessions, everything would be directed away from the abuse. I wasn't allowed to focus on the abuse. I was supposed to forget about the abuse. Move on with your life. Forget about it. So when I was about, like I said, 13, and I started running away, I wound up in foster care. And the first foster care home that I was in was awesome. And they seemed to be able to deal with kids who had been sexually abused, but that was never actually one of the objectives in my case, because other than the teacher reporting the abuse and founding of abuse, medically was founded abuse, because they took me to the doctor. And nobody talked about it. We didn't talk about it. It was not an issue. It was swept under the rug. Even the social workers and stuff, they didn't want to talk about it. So eventually, I wound up going into foster care. And while I was in foster care, I took off one night, and I had been raped in a hotel room. I left with these guys willingly. They were going to Chicago, and I decided to run away, and I thought my mom might be in Chicago. So I was like, okay, I'm going to go find my mom. That's all I wanted to do at 13, was to find my mom, because that's all I ever wanted, mom. And unfortunately, that didn't work out. They left me in the hotel room after drugging, and one of the guys raped me. And the thing about it is the police had his name and the people that he was traveling with, because the night before, how I had met them was by selling the glow necklaces and bracelets that you find at fairs and whatever. We had a laser light show. I was helping them sell them. We got busted by the police for not having a vendor's license, so everybody's name was taken, including mine. And mine was taken, was right below the name of the guy that raped me. And even after I had explained that to police, the police told me I had buyer's remorse, that I gave it up. No, I regretted it. So I wasn't raped. It was buyer's remorse, even though they found GHB in my system at the hospital. So that kind of put me in a real downward spiral, because when I was really little, there was nothing I could do about it. I wasn't big enough, but now I felt like, well, I'm big enough. At 13, I felt invincible. I felt like I'm almost an adult. I'm there. And I was a kid. And so that foster home let me go, and I wound up going to another foster home, only this foster home was way different. This foster home was disgusting from the moment you walked in. It smelled. There was cockroaches everywhere. There were flies. There were fleas in the refrigerator. I didn't eat there. I would not eat any prepared food from the place. When in foster care, you get an allowance or whatever. My little $5, I would eat ramen noodles, and they would buy sodas. And that's the only thing I would eat or drink out of the refrigerator, because there were fleas in the refrigerator. I would drink soda. But this place was nasty. I didn't spend most of my time there. We had a curfew there. But foster kids, kind of like, as a foster kid, you might as well say you're on your own, because foster parents aren't supposed to and aren't allowed to lay their hands on you or do anything like that. And so they give you the rules, and as long as you abide by these certain little rules, you stay. I'd been there for maybe a month or two, and my foster brother, who was older than me, and he always stayed in his bedroom, and he never came out, but one time they left, and we were sitting on the couch, and we were allowed to smoke cigarettes in the home as long as it was downstairs, and we're having a cigarette, and he told me, he said, "Don't go to the bathroom here." He said, "Just go to the store on the corner." He said, "And if you're going to take showers and stuff, I would do it in PE, after PE at gym." And so on my lunch breaks at school, that's when I would take a shower. I didn't know why. And then they'd left again, this time for a longer extended period of time. And he actually took me into their bedroom. And I was confused when I first walked in because I didn't have this type of carnal knowledge. I'd never been to an adult bookstore. I didn't know what a butt plug was. I didn't understand whips and chains and ball gags. And I certainly didn't understand the huge entertainment center that had all these wires feeding up into their ceiling tiles in their bedroom. They were on the first floor. Right above their bedroom, I would assume is the bathroom, but it's been a while. So there was like the first floor, and you walk in around, you walk up some stairs, and there was a landing where my foster brother's room was, and then you walk up a few more stairs, and then there's the bathroom, and then there's my room. And then that's when I noticed that all these wires snaking up from their bedroom were snaking up walls upstairs, and that in the bathroom there was no ceiling tiles. Over the shower area, there was no bathtub. It was just a standalone shower and the toilet. And if you look up, there's no ceiling tiles in there. And I don't even know how this place was passed for foster care. But what they were doing was they were videotaping the teenagers. Because they only accepted teenagers. They were videotaping the teenagers in the bathroom. And hindsight being 2020, I know that's what they were doing now. Back then, I didn't understand. I didn't know what was happening. I just listened to the advice of my foster brother. Foster kids kind of stick together, especially when it comes to foster parents. You hear a lot of stuff. There was another girl that I had known that I'd gone to school the previous year with, who was, because I'd moved to this foster home, I had to go to a different school. She was also going to it. And she was also a former foster care kid in their home. And I didn't know this until she saw me wearing her shirt to school one day. And she's like, "That's my shirt." She's like, "Where'd you get that shirt?" I'm like, "My foster parents gave it to me." She's like, "You stole it from me." I'm like, "I didn't steal it from anybody. They told me I could wear whatever was in the closet." It was her clothing. I was wearing another girl's clothing. And she was really mad about it. But I remember her, even though she was mad, because, she felt I'd stole her shirt. And I was defensive because I'm like, "I didn't steal your shirt." But then I didn't ever want to wear it again because I don't want to wear somebody else's stolen shirt. But she told me and looked me dead in my face and said, "You need to be careful of them. Watch them." So that night after the kid took me into their bedroom, I walked outside and I went to the store and did what I did. And curfew, I think, was at 11 o'clock at night. But they had a screened-in front porch, and you could sit on the front porch. As long as you were on the front porch and the door was closed, you made curfew. And it was about 9:30, and I was out there, and I had a cigarette, and I was getting ready to come back in. And I remember Carol poking her head in the little window, and she goes, "Oh, looks like you're a runaway," and locked the door. So I had no place to go, and so I took off again. Not the smartest, but that's what I did. And she, of course, did call the police, told them that I ran away, even though she locked me out of the house without anything. It was a matter of my word against her, so, I had a history of running away. I had a history of being anti-authoritative, so anything that she said, they were going to listen to anyway. So I took off. And I stayed with a friend, friends here and there. one of our things was chasing and waving down, flagging guys down, hot guys down with cars. Don't ask. And we did one time, and we wound up getting hooked up with this guy who planned a bonfire party. And my name is Misty, by the way, and my name wasn't very common. There was maybe one other Misty in the entire town, so there was only one of two options of Misty. And so I guess this guy told his friend about me and stuff like that. So when we're out there, it's dark, we got the bonfire going, we've already been drinking, lots of alcohol, lots of pot, and out comes this guy walking through the woods, and he comes and he sits down and he's like, "Hey, Misty." But the way he said it was like he knew me. And I'm looking at him and I'm like, "Okay, yeah, you're kind of familiar," but I just, I couldn't place him. I couldn't place the face. I knew him from somewhere. And finally, he revealed who he was, and I fell off the log, started bawling, because he was my detention center social worker. This guy knows me. He's one of the main case leads, managers on my case. He's the same social worker that used to hit on my mom. And then that night, I had an option, which the option I took was to run, but I didn't get very far. And he raped me, and he threatened that it was my word against his. Again, nobody would ever believe me. And that if I said anything, he would make my life a living hell. Eventually I got caught, because I kind of went off the deep end after that. I was drunk 24/7. It was back in the days when everybody drank Mad Dog 2020, and I would wake up drinking that because I didn't want to think about anything. I didn't want to think about where my next meal was coming from. I didn't want to think about when the police were going to come around the corner, or a social worker. And I would say now, I got some pretty heavy charges on me for grand theft with assault, and it probably saved my life, because even then I was not in the right mind. First of all, being drunk all the time. Second of all, the people that I hooked up with were passing me around. I guess that's the best way you could put it. They were passing me around, and I had to do what I had to do if I was that hungry. If I hadn't eaten in 3 days and somebody had a burger or something, hunger tends to outweigh everything else after a while. And eventually it just got so bad that, the assault happened, the robbery happened. J.C. Penney's probably saved my life. But at the same time, the charges that were brought against me did carry a sentence. I pled guilty to them, and I was given 6 months. But because the man that raped me was my social worker, I wound up doing 4 years in group homes from age 13, and I didn't get out till I aged out at 18. And that's because I told. I made the report to the first group home I went to, who was a mandatory reporter. They did no investigation that I know of. I reported it, she wrote it down, and then I was placed on a gambit of psychotropic drugs, antipsychotics, antidepressants, therapy groups that included guided imagery, which is another word for hypnosis. You're supposed to forget about these events. And so I did for a long time. And I turned 18, aged out of the system. And I didn't have anybody. I had nowhere to go. They helped me get into an apartment, but they didn't help me do anything like balance a checkbook, learn how to pay bills. None of the basic life skills that a person needs. I didn't have any of them. And I didn't have anybody around me, no support system, no friends, no family. And so I'm just out at 18 years old after being incarcerated from age 13. It's like I went from 13 to 18 overnight. I still had the mentality of a 13-year-old, but I was 18 now. And now I'm responsible for my own life. And I can't tell you how hard it has been to try to be a normal operating social human being, knowing what's out there, knowing how easily kids are targeted and how easy it is to manipulate children because they have that need to please, people please. Kids want to feel important and special. And these predators have a way of either doing that or completely and absolutely destroying them. And that's how I was groomed. I wasn't special. I was worthless. I didn't have any other purpose. So to come through on the other side of all that with a grain of sanity intact has not been easy. And I can't promise that the sanity is going to remain there because, it wasn't until a little over a year, maybe a year and 6 months ago, that I actually decided to confront this stuff because I kept having really bad night terrors. I was having a lot of problems in our relationship. I've always had problems in relationships with intimacy. I don't like it. Physical touch can be repulsive to me, which is really hard in a relationship. If you don't want somebody to hold your hand because the touch of their hand burns, and it's really hard. I have tried to commit suicide, and I've been hospitalized for suicide at least 7 or 8 times since I turned 18. Before that, 4 or 5 times. As a matter of fact, the last suicidal tendency and stay I had was in December of last year, because I had been working for a good long time on recovering my own memories, which thank you, armchair warriors, love you. When I started telling my story, people had questions. And at first I thought they're just questioning me because they don't believe me and they want these details. But they started researching for me. And not only through their research has a lot of my memories been validated, but it's so relieving to know that you're not crazy. Even though everybody has told you your whole life you're nuts, you're not. I'm actually sane in an insane world, and I grew up in this. I was raised by a system that corrupted me from the get-go. I honestly believe, maybe not the bikers, because the bikers were people my mom knew, but the armory? Why was I being taken to the armory with a bunch of other kids? They were grooming us. They were drugging us. They were abusing us. They were mind-fucking us. And I'm trying to keep my language kosher so it doesn't have to be beeped out and censored. But all I know is that I made it. And I didn't make it because I'm a strong person. I made it because I was lucky. I was lucky that there was a kindergarten teacher who didn't question her suspicions. I'm lucky. I'm lucky because I'm an asshole. I'm lucky because I've always had this anti-authoritative streak in me. Adults didn't know any better when I was a kid, and they didn't. Watching my family navigate their problems in life has given me a great understanding that adults didn't know what the hell they were doing, you know? They were struggling just as much as I was as a child. It was systematic, and I believe it was planned. And since then, and this is why I believe it's been planned, is because I've been targeted as an adult. Yeah, I have tried to commit suicide. But those are usually following, I don't know, another child abuse investigation. I had been investigated for child abuse several times. Once because my son had lead poisoning. Didn't know about it. He was so sick, I took him to the emergency room. I didn't know what to do. You know, I was a young mother. My kid was 3 years old. I didn't know why he wasn't eating. I didn't know why. All they wanted to do was sleep, so I took him to the emergency room. And next thing I know, I had social workers coming and looking in my cabinets and refrigerators to see if I was starving my child on purpose or what, because he wasn't gaining weight. And so that was the first time. Fortunately, the lead test proved that my kid was nowhere abused. Again, I had children and family services after I broke up with a guy. And I actually I was pregnant at the time with his child that I wound up giving up for adoption. He had restraining orders and everything against him. He was on an ankle monitor to stay away from my home. It was stalking, domestic violence situation. I'm not the one. But I did do it right, and I did go through legal channels to have that taken care of. And then the next thing I know, I have children and family services once again at my house because his brother decided to report on me. Fortunately, they were charged with making false reports. I was then, and those were in the state of New York and the state of Florida. Now, when I decided that I had been gone from my home state for almost 20 years, I guess, to go back. And I did. And there, I realized I should have never stepped back in that state. I had been investigated for child abuse 3 more times. The one I gave him, I pled guilty to it. I smoked pot. I'm not going to deny it. I'm not going to lie about it. And so they founded me for smoking pot. Give it to me. Hopefully when the laws change, they can knock that one off too. The second one, they got me good. Oh no, the second one was because my daughter had dental issues, so they called DHS on that. Also was within weeks was dropped. The case was dropped because she already had dentist appointments, surgical dentist appointment. But the last time that I was investigated, they tried very hard. They came in, they threatened they were taking my children because of black mold in the house. We got out of that situation, even though we wound up homeless with 4 kids in a hotel for several weeks. You know, we were able to finally get on our feet again, but they founded me for abuse. And I had to go up against the Iowa State Supreme Court and take it to the Court of Appeals. And I won my case because there was no abuse ever. And as a matter of fact, the social worker that had done the reporting lied. So, to me, I feel like I have been psychologically and mentally targeted and emotionally targeted because I wouldn't accept the abuse when I was young. I just wouldn't accept it. And I wasn't easily programmed. And kind of in a way, yeah, I was, because I did start following the patterns of abuse victims. I did experiment with drugs. I am not good with drugs. the depression, the medications that I was on. I was on medications for years after I aged out of the system. And actually, that's where most of my suicidal tendencies and my psychotic breaks took place, was while I was on medication. And at 23, I cut them all off cold turkey. I do not suggest that. Don't do it. Taper it off, because I almost stroked out from it. But after about a year of not having the drugs, there was a decided difference in how I felt as a human being. Like, I felt like a human being again. I wasn't being, I don't know, moderated by the medicines, I guess. And so it took me several years to get out of the programming that these group homes and social workers told me that I would never be able to operate a normal life without the use of those medications. And they were right about one thing: I've never been able to have a normal life, ever. While mostly rational, I somehow still operate from my emotions. And so anytime I'm overwhelmed or anything, I make drastic life decisions. But there's a few things that I've gained. I have gained so many supportive people. People out there that I've told my story to over and over are so supportive. And the people that helped me investigate my story, thank you so much, because you gave me the only truth there was, and that was my truth. And I knew what happened to me, and it felt like vindication and like a revelation that I could speak freely and not be silenced, not be called a liar, not be picked apart because I have mental issues. And I think that's part of the plan. I think you've got to have a pretty thick clinical file folder attesting to your mental health, so that there's always that deniability factor. I know for a fact that that social worker would deny that he raped me. I know for a fact that them foster parents probably could deny, but I honestly think that the foster brother was uploading all those videos to the internet. And that's another thing. I wonder how many videos I'm in from being really little on up, because I remember cameras everywhere, and I remember, I don't know. I don't look at porn. I went through the curiosity phase around 18, 19 when I found the internet, because the internet wasn't allowed in group homes and stuff. I got my curiosity itch scratched or whatever. It wasn't for me, because some of the first images I found were of children, knowing that it could have been me and knowing that it's other children out there. So I don't look at Pornhub. I'm not going to be one of those people that tells you where the best porn sites are. I don't have any desire to go look at that stuff. Mostly because not mostly, but, I have no desire to. But even if I did, would I find pictures of me on there?